Welcome, boys. So this video is going to be a short, quick video where we're just going to talk about boiling point and melting point a little bit more because I think it's a really cool concept and it's going to come up a lot more in your high school chemistry classes. Okay, so you should be quite familiar with it. When they talk about boiling point, you should be like, yeah, I got that, no problem. Okay, all right. So all materials have a temperature that they will melt at. So when I say melt, I mean they're a solid. They will turn into a liquid. Think of ice melting. It's solid. It turns into water, liquid water. Okay. If you take a metal and you put it in a furnace, it turns into molten steel, molten metal. That is because it's reached its melting point. If we go even further, all materials actually have a boiling point as well. And this is the point at which it turns into a gas. All right. So we can take solids that are traditionally solids like steel, and we can heat them enough until they actually turn into a gas. Okay, so here's a table of common melting points and boiling points. So I just want to go through it. So water has a melting point of 0 degrees Celsius. So what happens is if you have some ice and you raise the temperature around the ice to more than 0 degrees Celsius, the ice will begin to melt. Okay, that's why when you put ice in the palm of your hand, it melts against your hand because your hand should be at about 36 degrees Celsius. So the water begins to melt. Okay. It also goes the opposite way. If you take the temperature around water below 0 degrees, it begins to freeze. That's why places that are very cold have snow and ice, and it's called permafrost. It's always there because the temperature never goes above 0 degrees Celsius. So the water is always frozen, okay? So that's what the melting point of water is. The boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. So what happens is water will go from a liquid into a gas. It'll evaporate, like when you have a pot boiling on the stove and you see the water evaporating off the top or the steam rising. That's because you've reached 100 degrees. The water has reached a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius and it turns into a gas. Ethanol, which is alcohol, okay, it turns into a liquid at negative 114 degrees Celsius. So where you want to freeze water, you have to go below 0. If you want to freeze ethanol, or if you want to freeze pure alcohol, you have to drop it below 114 degrees Celsius. So that's very cold, to put it lightly, okay? So ethanol is generally in liquid form, but then if you warm up ethanol to 78 degrees Celsius, it will turn into a gas, okay? So 78 degrees Celsius is when it turns into a gas. So if you guys have got a hand sanitizer that has a high amount of alcohol, which is what's recommended now during the coronavirus, what happens is that that stuff evaporates very quickly because it doesn't need a very high temperature to evaporate, okay? All right, then we get to things like salt and lead, which we don't really think of as liquids, and that's because we have to get to super high temperatures to melt them. For salt, we need to get to 800 degrees Celsius to melt them. And if we want to turn salt into a gas that we can breathe, it needs to be 1,465 degrees Celsius, which is mind-blowingly hot. All right. Then you get lead, which needs a temperature of 375 to melt. Okay, that's not a very high temperature for metal. It is a high temperature, but it's not very high for metals. Okay, and then to turn it into a gas, it needs to reach 1,749 degrees Celsius. Just a fun fact: the surface temperature of Venus is 465, give or take, degrees. So if you went to Venus with a chunk of lead and you were able to survive, the lead would literally melt in your hand. It is so hot in Venus. Just an interesting fact. All right, last thing I want to say, and then we're done with this video. It went on a bit longer than it should have. No other material will have a melting point of 0 and 100, a boiling point of 100 besides water. No other material will have a melting point of negative 114 degrees Celsius and positive 78 degrees Celsius other than ethanol. Every material has its own melting and boiling point that it does not share with others. So if you can find out the melting and boiling point of a substance, you should be able to figure out what sort of substance it is. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Good luck.